Hey, friends, we live in such historic times. I mean, look what's going on in the media. Look what's going on in Israel. It's fighting for its life. It's like the 6-Day War where Israel is fighting to survive. So what do we do about it? Jews in the diaspora in these critical times. Are we with Israel? Are we on the sidelines? I want to share with you a very interesting insight, how I feel like God is knocking on the door and history is going to respond the way we respond. History is going to look at us. How did the Jews of this day respond? We read in the Torah portion this week how Moses sends 12 spies, 12 representatives to go of each tribe, one representative of each tribe to go and visit the land of Israel and spy and come back and give a report. There was one tribe called the tribe of Ephraim that the representative, his name was Hoshea, and Moses changed his name to Yehoshua. He added a letter of Yud before his name. He says, I'm going to add this letter before you go and scout the land, because this will give you the strength to know that God is with you. Because Moses was afraid that the energy from the other 10 spies, will not reflect well on how Joshua is going to be when he comes back with his report. Because he knew Joshua was very humble, and he went together with Caleb. But Moses was afraid that Joshua, specifically him, will come back not with the most positive report. So he added a yud to his name. But why only to his name? Why wasn't he afraid that the other spies will come back with a negative report? And we know that Joshua was so humble. We know that Joshua would do the right thing. Why did Moses pray for this man? And we read last week in the Torah reading that there were 70 elders appointed by Moses. Now, 2 of these elders prophesied that Moses is going to die in the desert and he will not make it into the land of Israel to lead the Jews into the land of Israel. And upon hearing this, many of the Jewish people, including these men that Moses appointed, and some of these who were later appointed to be the scouts, the spies, they had a terrible fear. They loved Moses so much, so deeply, that when they saw Moses was preparing for the Jewish people to go into the land of Israel, they said, this is not going to happen. We are not going to let our beloved teacher to perish in the desert. They made a pledge. They said, we would rather suffer terrible punishment for bringing back a negative report about the land of Israel than return with a good report that's going to bring the passing of our teacher, because Moses was not going to make it into the land. That's how deep their love was for Moses. And Moses noticed this. And there was another event that followed, that when 2 of these elders prophesied that this is going to happen, Joshua came running to Moses. He says, Moses, my master, go arrest those people. They're not prophesying good words. Moses saw that Joshua didn't want to really succeed him. Joshua preferred that Moses remain alive and that he's going to remain the student. That's how his sense of humility was to Moses. And Moses noted the reactions of the 10 men and that of Joshua when this prophecy took place. And he feared that their righteous devotion to him, that they'll come back with a negative report just so the Jews should stay in the desert, so that Moses shouldn't die. He saw all of that. And he said Joshua is such a man of humility that he might just join them. I mean, under ordinary circumstances, Joshua will never defy God's instructions. But under these circumstances, for the benefit of Moses, he might. And this humility could drive him to join this conspiracy, which was not good for the Jews, as we know. And that's why Moses prayed that God shield Joshua from this conspiracy. Yes, he will naturally empathize with them and with their motives. But Moses prayed that this Joshua overcome this empathy and do what God wants. And that's why he added the letter Yud to Joshua's name. From Hoshea became Yehoshua. And that Yud is to remind him that to respond the way God wants when God comes knocking at the door, even if it's inconvenient or you have reason to feel that what you're doing is right. Never turn your back onto God. There's a book called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, where it's an analogy. King Solomon, he describes a woman lying in bed. She says she's asleep, but she says, my heart is awake. She hears her beloved knocking at the door, and the beloved is saying, open for me, my sister, my perfect one. My locks dropped. My hearer is wants to be caressed by you. And it's a very evocative saga of what King Solomon describes. But really, what is it talking about? We are the ones lying in bed. God is the lover who's knocking at the door. And he really wants to have the relationship. And sometimes we say no. King Solomon describes how she says, the woman lying in bed says that I already removed my clothes, I'm already bathed, I'm cozy in bed, it's cold outside, I'm too lazy to jump out of bed to open the door for you. She says, I washed my feet, how can I soil them? And he goes on and on about the dialogue between the man, the lover at the door knocking, and the woman in bed who doesn't want to open. What's he referring to? He's referring to God as the lover of the Jewish people, and sometimes we refuse him. God comes knocking at the door, and sometimes we fail to open. And as God steps away, what happens when the man goes away from the door? It says the woman runs after him. But sometimes God is knocking on the door, and then we jump up and we say, where are you, my beloved? But God was there for us. And inside of us, we want to have that relationship with God, but we're held back because of all of the other things, the trappings of the world. And we jump out of bed. Sometimes we look, God, where are you? And then there's a tragedy, and we say, God, we call upon him and wonder, why is he not there? Where is he hiding? Yet what happens? He comes knocking on the door, and we're too lazy. King Solomon is describing a woman running through the night after the lover leaves, and she's calling for her beloved. And the guards, this is what he describes in King Solomon, they beat her because they mistake her for a criminal in the night. Yes, while she's running after her lover, which we're referring to as God. And the commentaries actually say this is what happened during history and different times in history. Rashi, the famous commentary, says this was the era after the first temple, when the first temple was destroyed. Why? Because we were like a cheating spouse. We refused to answer God's call. We said, God, we removed our tunic. What happened was there was a period of time where Jews were worshiping idols. And we felt so bad that we are so low away from God. We said, how could I return to you? Yet God came. He knocked on the door. But the Jews refused the call. Later on in history, Rabbi Yosef Kimchi, he said, you know what King Solomon was referring to? He was actually referring to a different era in Judaism. He was referring to the era of the Jews of Babylon, of Persia, who, when granted permission to go back from Persia to the Holy Land of Israel to rebuild the temple, what did the Jews respond symbolically? God, we removed our tunic. What does that mean? We were so poor, we're so downtrodden. How could we engage in nation building? We're having such struggles here paying our bills. How could we go back to the land of Israel to build a temple? Yet God came knocking on the door, and many Jews refused the call. Only a handful of Jews responded and returned to the Holy Land. Eventually the temple was built. Later on in our own time, in 1956, Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, he wrote a famous article. And he said, you know what the story of King Solomon's referring to? He says, Koil doidi doifek, what does it mean? The heart of my beloved is knocking. He applied King Solomon's story in the book of Song of Songs to a time reflecting of Americans' jury failure to respond to the call of God. He said, God came knocking when he provided us with a homeland to go back to after the Holocaust. And we didn't do enough. And he said in 1956, Israel faced danger, as we remember, from President Nasser of Egypt. And Rabbi Soloveitchik charged that God is knocking at the door, yet we're asleep. Friends, we all remember what happened 8 months ago, October 7th, the worst massacre since the days of the Holocaust. After that day of Simchas Torah, the Jewish heart was not just awake. We were aflame. We neither slept nor slumbered. We awoke like a lion to the roar of our pain in unison, and we pushed back against our enemies. Friends, it's been a long and painful road since then. And today, in the land of Israel, the wall of unity threatens to splinter once again. Let us remember, friends, that God is knocking, and let us answer his call, not to succumb to silly pettiness. Let us rise to this occasion, for history will judge us, friends. For what we do today will have historic implications. We need to retain our unity with a single-minded focus on a resounding victory that will secure our people in our homeland. Let us support our army against the forces of terror. Let us support our soldiers in the times of need. Let us, you and I, stand shoulder to shoulder to put away all these political games. For now is not the time to splinter our unity. Now is the time to journey forward, shoulder to shoulder. Friends, we all know the anti-Semitism, what's going on in the world, and our anti-Semitic neighbors are knocking down our doors with false charges of genocide and cruel labels of Nazism. But they're not the only ones knocking on the door, for God is also knocking. Let's not opt for the path of least resistance. Our brethren needs us. Our Father is calling us. Let us heed his call. Let us heed the lesson that Moses imparted to Joshua in this week's Torah portion. When God is knocking, answer the call. Let us know that we're never alone, even in the most challenging moments, friend. God is beckoning for us not to abandon him, even when we don't see him or feel him. Let us answer that call today. And may God show us in a most revealed way the true beauty and blessings in our own personal lives. Yes, we do have challenges, but know God is behind the door knocking. And ultimately, may God fulfill his wish, which is our wish, the coming of Mashiach, when the world will no longer know of any suffering or pain, of challenges, of hatred, and everything else we see today. Because at that time, the light of God will fill this earth as the waters that covers the oceans. So when you hear God knocking on the door, answer the call, and may you be blessed to see the revelation of all the blessings that you seek and pray for in your heart. May you personally no longer know of any suffering, of any pain, of any challenge. Let us not be lazy. Let us answer the door when God is calling. And may all those blessings be fulfilled personally in your life, in my life, in our lives. And may we merit that this world comes to see this revelation of godliness soon, but not soon, now, in my days, in your days. May it happen speedily, very, very soon. Shabbat Shalom.